Ambassador Zektar of the Galactic Council nervously adjusted his environmental suit as the shuttle approached the human homeworld. The readings streaming across his display were deeply disturbing. Atmospheric pressure readings that would crush most species like empty containers, gravity nearly triple the galactic standard, and radiation levels that required Class A military-grade shielding just to survive brief exposure. "Are you absolutely certain these coordinates are correct?" he asked his pilot for the fourth time, his voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. Captain Vorth, a sturdy Corvin whose species was renowned across the galaxy for their physical resilience and ability to survive in harsh conditions, double-checked his navigation systems with the methodical precision of a being who understood that mistakes in space were typically fatal. Triple-checked and confirmed by 3 separate navigation beacons. "Ambassador, this is definitely the planet the humans call Earth." The pilot's voice carried a note of professional disbelief that made Zektar's stomach churn with dread. The atmospheric composition alone should be immediately lethal to most known carbon-based life forms. 21% oxygen concentration? That's not just dangerous, sir. That's practically an explosive atmosphere waiting for ignition. Zektar reviewed his extensive briefing notes one final time, hoping against hope that he had somehow misunderstood the data. When humanity had first applied for Galactic Council membership 18 standard months ago, their planet had been automatically classified as a Class 13 Deathworld, the absolute highest rating on the habitability danger scale. Most council members had initially assumed it was simply an error in the humans' paperwork, a mistake in unit conversion, or perhaps a clerical error by some inexperienced human bureaucrat. Surely no sapient species could possibly evolve, let alone thrive, on such an unimaginably hostile environment. The shuttle touched down with a gentle thud at what the humans called Kennedy Space Center, in a geographical region they referred to as Florida. As they disembarked through the airlock, Zektar was immediately and profoundly struck by the casual, almost careless way the humans moved about in the open air without any protective gear whatsoever, no environmental suits, no breathing apparatus, no radiation shielding, nothing but thin layers of what appeared to be decorative fabric. "Welcome to Earth, Ambassador Zektar," called out a tall human female with short brown hair, her voice carrying clearly through the heavy, oxygen-rich atmosphere that should have been toxic to most life forms. "I'm Director Rebecca Thompson, and we're truly honored to host the Council's official evaluation team." Zektar's universal translator struggled noticeably with the human's rapid, energetic speech patterns and the peculiar way she seemed to forcefully exhale between certain words, a behavior his pre-mission briefing materials had identified as laughter, though its purpose remained unclear to xenobiologists. "Director Thompson," he replied with the formal diplomatic protocols drilled into him during years of training, "I must express the Council's significant concern regarding the preliminary classification of your world. Our long-range sensors and atmospheric analysis equipment indicate environmental conditions that should result in immediate mortality for most known biological entities." Rebecca's face performed what Zektar was beginning to recognize as a distinctly human expression. The corners of her mouth curved upward in what appeared to be a display of pleasure. "Oh, you mean today's weather? Yeah, it's actually a pretty nice day for this time of year. Sunny skies, temperatures sitting at about 85 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity's only around 70%. Perfect beach weather." "Really?" Zektar's sophisticated environmental sensors immediately began screaming urgent warnings about the perfect conditions she had so casually described. The ambient temperature was hot enough to begin denaturing proteins in most council species. The humidity levels would effectively drown air-breathing beings by saturating their respiratory systems, and the unfiltered solar radiation pouring down from above. "Director," he managed, his voice strained despite his diplomatic training, "are you not deeply concerned about the continuous stellar radiation bombardment you're experiencing?" "What? The sunshine?" Rebecca actually laughed. That strange, forceful exhalation again. "Nah, it feels great. Nothing like natural sunlight to boost your mood. Want to come see the outdoor welcoming ceremony we've prepared?" "Outdoor ceremony." Zektar physically shuddered inside his protective suit. These humans were either the most impossibly resilient species in the known galaxy, or they were all completely, utterly insane. The tour began in what Director Thompson cheerfully called the Visitor Center, and Zektar immediately noticed something that made his diplomatic training completely inadequate for the situation. The walls were constructed entirely of some kind of transparent material that seemed impossibly thin and fragile. Director Thompson, he inquired with genuine scientific curiosity, what manner of advanced force field technology maintains your atmospheric integrity through these transparent barriers? Force field. Rebecca laughed again, that peculiar expulsion of breath that his translator had identified but still couldn't properly categorize. Oh, Ambassador, that's just glass. Simple silicon dioxide that's been heated and cooled. Pretty standard building material here on Earth. Been using it for thousands of years. Glass. They built their critical life support structures from glass. Zektar discreetly made a note in his diplomatic records. Humans construct essential habitations from brittle mineral compounds with no backup containment systems. Possible species-wide death wish cultural trait requiring further psychological evaluation. As they walked through what appeared to be a recreational area, Zektar observed something that made his environmental suit's threat detection systems activate. Human juveniles running at high velocity across completely open ground with no protective gear, no adult supervision within immediate rescue distance, and no apparent concern for the numerous hazards present. Adult humans watched this chaos with what could only be described as relaxed satisfaction. Suddenly, one particularly small human lost control of its locomotion and impacted the ground with considerable force, immediately beginning to expel red liquid from a scraped limb. Medical emergency, Zektar exclaimed, instinctively reaching for his emergency beacon transmitter. We need immediate trauma response. Where? Rebecca spun around with sudden alertness, scanning the area for danger. The small human, it's hemorrhaging biological fluid. Rebecca followed his pointing gesture to observe the juvenile, who had already regained its footing and resumed running at dangerous speeds, leaving a small trail of red droplets in the dust behind it. Oh, that's just little Jimmy Patterson. He scraped his knee pretty good. He'll be fine, kids heal fast. But the blood loss, the open wound, the contamination risk from ground contact. Kids are incredibly tough, Ambassador. They bounce back from just about anything. As if to demonstrate her point, she reached out and casually ruffled the hair of another small human, who sprinted past them at what Zektar's motion sensors registered as potentially dangerous velocity. This little one here fell clean out of an oak tree last week. Broke her arm in 2 places. The doctor put a cast on it, and she was trying to climb again just 2 days later. Zektar's advanced sensors detected the continuous electromagnetic signatures of the system's primitive fusion reactor, what humans casually referred to as the sun, bombarding everything in the area with radiation levels that would effectively sterilize most inhabited worlds within hours. Yet these creatures not only survived the constant bombardment, they seemed to actively seek it out. Several humans lay completely motionless on reflective metallic surfaces, apparently absorbing the deadly stellar rays for what could only be described as recreational purposes. They're engaged in something we call sunbathing, Rebecca explained with obvious pleasure. It helps our bodies produce vitamin D naturally, plus most people think a good tan looks healthy and attractive. They deliberately expose themselves to potentially lethal stellar radiation for purely cosmetic purposes. Zektar's diplomatic notes were becoming increasingly frantic and concerned. The most psychologically disturbing sight was yet to come. In the distance, he observed a large group of humans engaged in what appeared to be organized ritualistic combat, running at dangerous speeds directly toward each other, deliberately colliding with tremendous force, and fighting desperately over possession of an inflated leather sphere. Ambassador, he asked carefully, is this perhaps some form of gladiatorial punishment system for criminal offenders? What, the football practice? Rebecca looked genuinely confused. Oh no, that's just the local high school team getting ready for Friday night's big game against their crosstown rivals. Want to go watch for a while? It's pretty entertaining. Fun. They considered organized ritualistic combat to be entertaining. Zektar was beginning to understand exactly why Earth had been classified as a Class 13 Deathworld. The real question now was, how had these apparently insane creatures managed to not only survive, but actually thrive in such unimaginably hostile conditions? The next morning brought what Director Thompson described with characteristic human understatement as a typical weather pattern, something she casually referred to as a thunderstorm, as if the term itself wasn't absolutely terrifying to any rational being. Zektar huddled in what Rebecca had assured him was a perfectly safe, reinforced underground facility, watching through reinforced transparent aluminum barriers as electrical discharges of several million volts split the sky outside with violent, chaotic energy. Each lightning bolt carried enough power to completely vaporize most council species, accompanied by acoustic concussions that registered on his sensitive instruments as potentially structure-damaging sonic attacks. Water fell from the atmosphere in quantities that would constitute a catastrophic flash flood on any civilized world. Beautiful storm, isn't it? Rebecca commented with obvious pleasure, standing casually by the large window and watching the atmospheric chaos outside as if it were some kind of entertainment. Nothing quite like a good old-fashioned thunderstorm to clear the air and cool things down. Director Thompson, Zektar managed, his voice tight with barely controlled panic as another massive electrical discharge split the sky with a sound like the universe tearing apart. Should we not be implementing immediate emergency evacuation protocols? These energy discharges appear to be striking targets completely at random. Lightning? Oh, it's really not that dangerous when you think about it statistically. Rebecca shrugged with maddening casualness. Sure, it'll definitely kill you if it hits you directly, but the mathematical odds are actually pretty low. More people get struck by lightning than win the big lottery jackpots, but way more people play the lottery than actually get struck by lightning, you know what I mean? Zektar's sophisticated universal translator gave up entirely on parsing that particular piece of human logic. Through the protective barrier, he watched in absolute horror as humans continued to move about in the storm zone, some actually holding primitive metal frameworks over their heads. Umbrellas, Rebecca called them with a straight face, as if flimsy cloth and thin metal would somehow protect them from the ongoing atmospheric assault. But the electrical discharge patterns, the conductive metal structures they're carrying. Most umbrellas have plastic or wooden handles these days, so they're pretty safe from lightning strikes. Rebecca paused thoughtfully. Although my grandfather always used to say never hold a metal-handled umbrella during a lightning storm. He got struck twice in his lifetime, actually. Twice. Zektar's voice rose to what he hoped wasn't an undignified squeak. And he survived both incidents? Oh yeah, Grandpa Joe was tough as old leather boots. The second lightning strike just singed his eyebrows clean off and left him with a funny ringing in his ears for a few weeks. He always used to joke that lightning never strikes the same place twice, but apparently it makes exceptions for stubborn old farmers who don't have enough sense to come in out of the rain. As if to demonstrate the utterly casual relationship humans maintained with death itself, a small juvenile human ran past the window at that exact moment, deliberately leaping through puddles that would qualify as small ponds on most worlds, laughing with obvious joy as electrical fire split the sky directly above its unprotected head. Shouldn't that juvenile seek immediate emergency shelter? Kids absolutely love puddle jumping. Rebecca smiled with what Zektar was learning to recognize as parental nostalgia. I used to do exactly the same thing when I was her age. My mother used to say I'd catch my death of cold running around in the rain like that, but I never did. Builds character. Builds character. As if surviving environmental hazards was some form of moral improvement rather than sheer blind luck. The storm passed after what Rebecca described as just a quick little shower, 2 hours of continuous atmospheric violence that would have been officially declared a natural disaster requiring emergency response on any properly civilized world. As the humans emerged from their shelters and immediately resumed their normal daily activities, Zektar began to formulate a disturbing new theory about the true nature of Earth's classification. Perhaps Earth wasn't classified as a Class 13 Deathworld because it was unusually dangerous by objective standards. Perhaps it was classified that way because the humans who lived on it were so unusually indestructible that they had completely redefined what constituted habitable conditions. Today I thought we'd show you some of our recreational facilities, Rebecca announced cheerfully over what humans called breakfast, a meal that had already shocked Zektar with its casual consumption of stimulants and potentially toxic biological matter. Give you a real sense of how humans like to spend their leisure time when we're not working. Zektar had rapidly learned to approach any human statement containing the word recreational with extreme caution and considerable dread. When humans described something as fun, it usually involved activities that would be classified as life-threatening on any rational world. The first stop was something called a swimming pool, and Zektar watched in absolute fascination mixed with horror as humans deliberately submerged themselves completely in a large artificial container filled with dihydrogen monoxide, a substance that would effectively drown most air-breathing species within minutes of exposure. The pools heated to a comfortable 78 degrees Fahrenheit, Rebecca mentioned with casual pleasure, as if the temperature of the drowning liquid was somehow relevant to the insanity of the activity. Perfect temperature for doing laps or just relaxing in the water. Heated. They artificially heated the potentially lethal liquid to make the experience of near drowning more comfortable and enjoyable. And these smaller humans, Zektar observed with growing alarm, watching juveniles climb to elevated platforms before launching themselves through the air. They appear to be deliberately throwing themselves into the liquid from dangerous heights? That's our diving board. The kids absolutely love it. Rebecca pointed proudly to a flexible platform extending over the water. That's only the 3-meter board for beginners. We have a 10-meter platform on the other side for our advanced divers and the really brave ones. 10 meters. They encouraged their juveniles to throw themselves from heights that would cause serious injury or death to most species, into a substance that could kill them through drowning, purely for the sake of entertainment. The next stop was even more psychologically disturbing. Rebecca led him to a large open field where humans were engaged in what appeared to be a form of organized warfare, using wooden clubs to strike a small leather sphere at velocities that would constitute assault with a deadly weapon on any civilized world. Baseball, Rebecca explained with obvious enthusiasm. America's favorite pastime. Been playing it for over a century. That pitcher has a pretty impressive fastball, probably throwing somewhere around 95 miles per hour today. Zektar's sophisticated combat analysis systems automatically calculated the kinetic energy of a solid sphere moving at such tremendous velocity. This projectile could cause severe cranial trauma, broken bones, or internal organ damage upon impact. Well, yeah, if it hits you in the head or body, it's definitely going to hurt, Rebecca agreed matter-of-factly. That's exactly why batters wear protective helmets and why we have all those safety rules. Safety first, right? Safety first. While voluntarily playing a game that involved hurling potentially lethal projectiles at each other with tremendous force. As if the universe was conspiring to prove his growing theory about human insanity, the leather sphere struck the wooden club with a sharp crack that registered on his audio sensors as a minor explosive event, and the projectile flew through the air at an even higher velocity than before. Multiple humans in the distance immediately began running at dangerous speeds toward the precise location where the deadly projectile was falling, actually attempting to catch it with their bare, unprotected hands. Excellent hit! Rebecca cheered with genuine excitement. That one might make it all the way out of the park. The most bewildering sight was yet to come. In another area of what humans called their recreational complex, Zektar observed people strapping long wooden boards to their feet before launching themselves down steep, snow-covered inclines at speeds that would certainly be fatal if they lost control and collided with any solid object. Skiing, Rebecca said proudly. Fantastic exercise for the whole family, and the mountain air up there is so clean and refreshing. They are traveling down a steep geographical grade, on a slippery frozen surface, at potentially lethal velocity, with no apparent mechanical control or safety systems. Oh, they can definitely control their speed and direction. See how they turn and carve through the snow? That level of skill takes years of dedicated practice. My youngest daughter started skiing when she was only 4 years old. They began training their juveniles in potentially deadly recreational activities at age 4. Zektar was starting to understand something absolutely crucial about human psychology and culture. These weren't activities they engaged in despite the obvious danger. These were activities they specifically enjoyed because of the inherent risk and potential for serious injury. Director Thompson, he said carefully, do humans perhaps have a fundamentally different relationship with mortality than most other known sapient species? Rebecca looked genuinely thoughtful for a moment. How do you mean exactly? Do you not experience fear of death as a primary survival instinct? She laughed, that peculiar sound again. Of course we're afraid of dying. That's exactly what makes these activities so exciting and addictive. If there was no real risk involved, what would be the point of doing them? What indeed? The morning of the fourth day brought what Rebecca described as a typical human breakfast, and Zektar watched in mounting horror as she casually consumed what could only be described as a carefully orchestrated chemical assault on her own biological systems. The first item was a dark, steaming liquid that registered on his sophisticated sensors as containing significant concentrations of a psychoactive alkaloid compound, essentially a mind-altering drug that would be classified as a controlled substance requiring medical supervision on most council worlds. Coffee, she explained cheerfully, taking another substantial sip of what was essentially a stimulant delivery system disguised as a beverage. Absolutely can't start the day without it. Most humans are basically non-functional until they get their morning caffeine fix. Some people I know drink 6 or 7 cups throughout the day just to maintain normal productivity levels. 6 or 7 doses of psychoactive stimulants daily, as a completely normal and socially acceptable part of their routine biological maintenance. The rest of the breakfast was equally alarming from a xenobiological perspective. Rebecca proceeded to consume what appeared to be the unfertilized reproductive cells of an avian species, the processed and chemically preserved muscle tissue of a mammalian creature, and fermented grain products that had been subjected to extreme heat treatment. When Zektar carefully inquired about the potential safety risks of consuming such biologically complex materials, she seemed genuinely confused by his concern. Eggs, bacon, and toast? That's just normal breakfast food, Ambassador. She paused thoughtfully while consuming another strip of the preserved mammal flesh. Although I suppose the bacon isn't particularly great for long-term cholesterol levels and cardiovascular health. But hey, you've got to die of something eventually, right? You've got to die of something eventually. As if mortality was simply an accepted and inevitable part of existence rather than something to be avoided through careful risk management and advanced medical intervention. The educational tour continued to what Rebecca enthusiastically called a farmer's market, apparently a regular social gathering where humans congregated to exchange various unprocessed biological materials for direct consumption. Zektar observed them handling raw plant matter with no protective equipment whatsoever, often consuming it immediately after what appeared to be minimal cleaning procedures involving nothing more than water application. That's a fresh apple from Johnson's orchard, Rebecca explained, taking a substantial bite of a red spherical object she had briefly rinsed under a simple water spigot. Nothing beats fruit that's been naturally tree-ripened under real sunlight. You can really taste the difference. But the surface contamination from environmental exposure, the naturally occurring defensive toxins that plants produce. Apples are pretty safe for human consumption, Rebecca said matter-of-factly. I mean, the seeds do contain trace amounts of naturally occurring cyanide compounds, but you'd have to deliberately eat several hundred seeds to experience any real toxicity symptoms. Besides, the skin contains most of the beneficial vitamins and fiber anyway. Cyanide. She was casually mentioning that her recreational food contained cyanide compounds while continuing to consume it without apparent concern. The most psychologically disturbing discovery came when they visited what Rebecca called a restaurant, a commercial establishment where humans regularly gathered to consume food prepared by complete strangers using ingredients and preparation methods they had no direct knowledge of or control over. The menu listed items containing substances that would be classified as potentially dangerous chemical weapons on most civilized worlds. Capsaicin concentrations that would cause severe tissue damage, ethyl alcohol in quantities that would impair cognitive function, and something ominously called ghost peppers that registered on his chemical sensors as a legitimate biological weapon. The 5-alarm chili here is absolutely fantastic, Rebecca recommended with obvious enthusiasm. It'll definitely clear your sinuses right out and make you sweat, but that's half the fun of eating really spicy food. Clear your sinuses, as if causing involuntary bodily fluid discharge and elevated stress responses was somehow a desirable outcome of the nutrition process. Zektar watched in fascinated horror as a nearby table of humans consumed what appeared to be completely raw aquatic flesh, while dipping it in a bright green paste that made his chemical detection systems scream urgent warnings about potential biological hazards and tissue damage. Sushi and wasabi, Rebecca noted casually, following his alarmed gaze. Traditional Japanese cuisine that's become incredibly popular worldwide. Absolutely delicious when it's prepared correctly. That aquatic creature flesh appears to be completely uncooked. Exactly right. Fresh raw tuna, salmon, and yellowtail. Completely delicious. They regularly consumed raw flesh from aquatic creatures that could contain parasites, bacterial contamination, or accumulated environmental toxins from their oceanic habitat. And they considered it a culinary delicacy worthy of celebration. Zektar was beginning to realize that humans hadn't simply survived on their Class 13 Deathworld through superior resilience. They had embraced the danger so completely that they had transformed potentially lethal consumption into sophisticated forms of recreational entertainment. The visit to what humans called a hospital provided the most psychologically shocking revelations yet about the true nature of human biology and their incomprehensible relationship with mortality. Zektar had expected to find a facility overwhelmed with casualties from humanity's daily brush with death, groaning corridors filled with the victims of their species' reckless lifestyle. Instead, he discovered something far more disturbing. Humans who had survived catastrophic injuries that should have resulted in immediate and irreversible death. This is Dr. Elena Martinez. Rebecca introduced him to a human female wearing pristine white clothing and displaying the peculiar facial expression humans use to indicate friendliness. She's the head of our emergency trauma department and has been working here for almost 15 years. Dr. Martinez gripped Zektar's manipulator appendage with what seemed like deliberately excessive force, apparently another human social custom. Ambassador Zektar, we've heard so much about your visit. Rebecca mentioned you were particularly curious about human medical practices and our approach to treating injuries. Want to see some of our more interesting cases? The first patient they encountered was a human male who appeared to be in remarkably good spirits despite the obvious fact that his lower locomotion appendage was clearly fractured in multiple locations, with visible bone displacement that would be considered a mortal wound on most civilized worlds. Motorcycle accident, Dr. Martinez explained with the same casual tone one might use to describe weather conditions. Tommy here hit a full-grown deer at approximately 60 miles per hour, got launched about 30 feet through the air, and managed to break his femur in 3 distinct places while also cracking 2 ribs and sustaining minor internal bleeding. This catastrophic injury pattern should result in immediate systemic shock and probable mortality, Zektar observed, his medical sensors confirming the severity of the trauma. Oh, Tommy's incredibly tough. This is actually his 3rd major accident just this year alone. Dr. Martinez checked a handheld device displaying the patient's vital signs, which appeared to be remarkably stable. We'll have him completely fixed up and back on his motorcycle within 6 to 8 weeks. Good as new. 3rd major accident. In a single standard year. And he was already planning to return to the exact same activity that had repeatedly nearly killed him. The next patient was even more medically impossible. A small human female who had apparently fallen from a significant height while engaged in something called rock climbing, yet seemed more concerned about returning to the dangerous activity than recovering from her injuries. About a 30-foot fall onto some pretty unforgiving granite, Dr. Martinez noted, examining what appeared to be extensive but non-critical damage. Dislocated shoulder, mild concussion, various abrasions, and contusions. Pretty typical climbing accident, really. Emma here is already asking when she can get back to the rock face. The juvenile wishes to immediately return to the activity that caused these injuries? That's our Emma. She's been one of our regular patients since she started climbing at age 6. Takes after her father, who's been free solo climbing for over 20 years without major incident. Free solo climbing. Zektar's database search returned results that made his cognitive functions temporarily freeze with incomprehension. Climbing vertical rock faces hundreds of feet high with absolutely no safety equipment whatsoever. The tour continued through medical wards filled with humans recovering from what should have been completely unsurvivable trauma. Burns from activities called welding and fire dancing. Lacerations from something called chainsaw carving. Multiple bone fractures from extreme sports that seemed specifically designed to cause maximum injury potential. The really remarkable thing, Dr. Martinez mentioned as they walked through a rehabilitation wing, is how dramatically human healing rates have improved over the past few generations. We think it's because we're constantly experiencing minor injuries throughout our lives. Cuts, bruises, minor fractures. It's like our bodies are in constant practice mode for healing and recovery. You believe that repeated injury makes your species more resilient to future trauma? Absolutely, without question. That's why children who grow up on farms or in rural areas tend to have stronger immune systems and faster healing responses than urban kids. More exposure to dirt, bacteria, minor injuries, physical challenges. It builds both immunity and general toughness. They deliberately exposed their developing juveniles to pathogens and physical trauma to enhance their biological resilience. The final stop was the most medically bewildering. A specialized ward where humans were voluntarily undergoing surgical procedures that involved deliberately cutting open their bodies and replacing natural biological organs with artificial mechanical devices. Cardiac surgery, Dr. Martinez explained. Mrs. Johnson here is receiving her third pacemaker replacement. She's 93 years old and still lives independently. 93 years. On a Class 13 Deathworld. With multiple artificial organs maintaining her continued existence. Dr. Martinez, Zektar asked carefully, what is the typical lifespan for humans living under these extreme environmental conditions? Oh, about 70 to 80 years on average, depending on lifestyle factors and genetic predisposition. Some people routinely make it past 100. The oldest verified human in recorded history lived to 122 years old. Over a century. On a world that should eliminate most species within hours of exposure. Zektar was beginning to suspect that the Galactic Council had made a fundamental categorization error in their planetary classification system. Earth wasn't designated as a Class 13 Deathworld despite being inhabited by humans. Earth was classified as a Class 13 Deathworld specifically because it was lethal to everyone except humans. On the final day of his comprehensive evaluation visit, Ambassador Zektar requested a private meeting with Director Thompson in what she called her office, a room featuring multiple transparent barriers that allowed the planet's deadly solar radiation to pour directly through without any apparent filtration or protective screening. Director Thompson, he began with the careful diplomatic precision that had been drilled into him through decades of interspecies relations training. I must ask you a direct and potentially sensitive question. Are humans fully aware that your homeworld is officially classified as Class 13 on the Galactic Habitability Scale? Rebecca looked genuinely puzzled, her brow furrowing in the way humans did when processing unexpected information. Class 13? That seems kind of high, doesn't it? I mean, sure, Earth has its challenges and isn't perfect, but it's not like we're trying to live on a gas giant or inside the corona of a star or anything crazy like that. Director Thompson, Zektar said carefully, Class 13 is literally the highest possible rating for worlds that can theoretically support biological life. It indicates environmental conditions that are immediately and inevitably lethal to virtually all known sapient species in the galaxy. Ha! Rebecca seemed to genuinely consider this information for the first time. So you're saying that other species would actually find Earth genuinely dangerous to live on? Director Thompson, your atmospheric pressure would physically crush most council member races within minutes of exposure. Your oxygen concentration levels are so extraordinarily high that simple mechanical friction can cause explosive combustion events. Your planetary gravity is nearly triple what most species can survive for extended periods. Your unfiltered solar radiation requires Class A military shielding for even brief exposure periods. Your routine weather patterns involve electrical discharges powerful enough to supply energy to small metropolitan areas. Your native biological ecosystem includes apex predators that could single-handedly eliminate entire council colonial populations. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully, seeming to genuinely process this perspective for the first time. You know, when you put it that way, I suppose Earth might be somewhat challenging for extraterrestrial visitors to adapt to. Somewhat challenging. Zektar's sophisticated universal translator struggled with what appeared to be a massive understatement. Director, over the past week I have personally observed humans engaging in recreational activities that would be classified as elaborate torture methods on most civilized worlds. You routinely consume substances that are literally toxic to biological systems. You deliberately expose yourselves to environmental conditions specifically designed to cause injury and physiological stress. Your juveniles participate in organized combat sports as normal educational development. Well, yeah, but that's exactly how children learn proper risk assessment and develop good judgment, Rebecca replied matter-of-factly. You can't protect them from every possible danger, or they'll never develop the survival skills and decision-making abilities they need as adults. And yet, Zektar continued, his voice carrying a note of professional amazement. Your species has not merely survived these extreme conditions. You have absolutely thrived under them. You have developed sophisticated technology that allows interstellar travel. You have created complex art, literature, music, and philosophical frameworks. You have constructed a unified planetary civilization that spans every continent and climate zone. Well, thanks. Rebecca seemed genuinely unsure whether this was intended as a compliment or an accusation. Director Thompson, I believe the Galactic Council has made a fundamental philosophical error in our assessment methodology. We classified Earth as a Class 13 Deathworld because we automatically assumed that any planet exhibiting such extreme environmental conditions must be essentially uninhabitable by definition. We never seriously considered the possibility that a sapient species might evolve not just to survive such conditions, but to actively require them for optimal psychological and physical development. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression crossing her features. Are you saying that other inhabited worlds are significantly safer than Earth? Most Council member worlds maintain completely stable weather patterns, carefully filtered solar radiation, precisely controlled atmospheric compositions, and gravity levels specifically optimized for maximum comfort and safety. The average Council citizen might experience 1 or 2 minor injuries during their entire natural lifespan. That sounds. Rebecca paused, apparently searching for the appropriate word to express her reaction. Incredibly boring, actually. Boring. I mean, if there's no real challenge, no element of risk, no genuine possibility of failure or consequences, what's the actual point? How do you know you're really living your life to the fullest if you're never testing your limits or pushing boundaries? And there it was, the fundamental philosophical difference between humans and virtually every other species in the known galaxy. Other species instinctively measured habitability by safety, comfort, and predictability. But humans had evolved on a world that demanded constant adaptation, resilience, and strength. They didn't simply tolerate danger as an unfortunate necessity. They genuinely needed it for psychological fulfillment. Director Thompson, I believe humanity's application to join the Galactic Council will be unanimously approved. That's fantastic news. When do you think we'll receive official notification? There will likely need to be some extensive adjustments to our standard diplomatic facilities and procedures. Most Council installations are simply not designed to accommodate beings who require Class 13 environmental conditions for basic comfort. Rebecca grinned widely, that distinctly human expression that seemed to indicate both pleasure and anticipation. Don't worry about us, Ambassador. Humans are incredibly adaptable creatures. We'll definitely make it work somehow. As Zektar prepared for his departure from Earth, he realized he would need to recommend a complete and comprehensive revision of the galactic habitability scale. Because if humans could not only survive but actually thrive on a Class 13 death world, then perhaps the Council's entire definition of habitable conditions had been far too restrictive and narrow-minded. After all, any species that genuinely considered explosive atmospheric composition, crushing gravity, lethal radiation exposure, and violent electrical storms to be nice weather clearly had a fundamentally different relationship with the universe than everyone else. And perhaps that unique perspective was exactly what the galaxy had been missing all along. Author's note: this HFY story explores the classic theme of humans being unconsciously badass by showing how what we consider normal daily life would appear absolutely terrifying to alien species evolved on safer worlds. The humor comes from the contrast between the aliens' horror and human casual attitudes toward danger, while the underlying message celebrates human resilience and adaptability.